So welcome to Infrastructure Matters by IPWEA. It's a podcast where we discuss all things infrastructure, asset management and public works. My name is David Jenkins. I'm the Chief Exec of IPWEA, and I have the very fortunate job of talking to inspiring and passionate thought leaders from around the globe. Our podcast is a chance to reflect, hopefully learn something new, and get a glimpse into the great minds of our profession and their personal journeys. Today marks the beginning of an exciting new series and where we'll be talking to some of the most inspiring and passionate thought leaders from around the globe. These conversations aim to not only enlighten us about the complexities and challenges of managing infrastructure, but also to share the personal journeys and experiences of those who dedicate their lives to this vital field. In this inaugural episode, we're setting the stage for what you can expect in the episodes to come. Our goal is to provide a platform where we can reflect, learn and get a glimpse into the minds of professionals who make a significant impact in our profession. So without further ado, let's dive into our first episode of the series. I'm delighted to welcome Councillor Linda Scott, who's an experienced non-executive director and local government leader, currently serving as the president of the Australian Local Government Association. Linda represents 537 local governments alongside the Prime Minister, Premiers, Chief Minister and the National Cabinet. Linda is also a Labour councillor at the City of Sydney, first elected in 2012 and re-elected in 2016 and 2021. As a City of Sydney councillor, she has won new affordable housing, increased support for those experiencing homelessness, funding for new childcare centres and skate ramps, and spearheaded the city's action to fight racism and support refugees. And Linda, I'm absolutely delighted that you're here to have a conversation with us today. So thank you ever so much.
It's great to be with you.
So my first question, and for those of you that don't know, we work very closely with ALGA on the National State of the Assets project, which we released a report in 2021, and we've done it previous years as well, and we're now going to be launching 2024. So Linda, I'm just really keen, in terms of your viewpoint, why is the National State of the Assets report so important?
I think there's two reasons. One is that in this particularly unusual economic time, it's really important in the national interest for the public to have an understanding about the state of local government's assets. We obviously own, for example, about 75% of the national road network by length. That's incredibly important for Australia's national productivity, our ability to move things around and ensure that our communities have access to, food, water, all those really important things that are transported on our roads via those freight routes. And also it's important because for our advocacy on behalf of Australia's councils, it's important to understand and help the Commonwealth Government understand where we really need to see funding to local government and what a difference it can make. We know, for example, because we've been doing this work in great partnership with IPWEA over a couple of different iterations of the National State of the Assets, that in the past we've seen a relationship between funding and the state of the assets. And the more we're able to look at this research base and show the evidence of that trend, the better we're able to advocate to the Commonwealth Government about where funding needs to go and what an impact it can make on Australian communities when local government is properly funded.
So when we released the 2021 report, what successes did you find then from an advocacy point of view? The report had a number of key figures, one of them being $53 billion worth of assets are still in a poor state of repair. Yes, the government was, although it's changed slightly recently with the infrastructure pipeline, we're still putting more money into new infrastructure. What successes from your advocacy campaign did you find off the back of the 2021 report?
A lot, and it's really why this evidence base is so important to us. So to give you a couple of recent examples, in spite of our federal government being in record debt as a result of the COVID pandemic, we have been able to increase federal assistance grants in the last year by $100 million to all local governments. We are, of course, and have long advocated for federal assistance grants to be doubled up to at least 1% of Commonwealth taxation revenue. But to take those grants from 3 to 3.1 billion, that extra $100 million of untied funding to councils, that really makes a difference on the ground to Australian communities. And that was directly as a result of being able to highlight to the government the challenges we're having in simply maintaining our infrastructure. We know that governments love to provide targeted grants, and we really appreciate those, but we know in particular that when it comes to infrastructure, those untied funds are just so important. They give councils the flexibility to be able to do different things in different parts of Australia depending on what's needed. So that was a really tangible, substantial financial victory that we achieved. We've also, alongside councils, been able to advocate recently as part of the National Housing Accord for an additional $500 million annual fund for local governments to invest in local infrastructure. On the basis of the State of the Assets report, we were able to show the Commonwealth that there are gaps in infrastructure provision that are getting in the way of delivering housing for Australians. We're not, for example, able to build communities with connections to water mains, and that's stopping people from moving into new homes. So that advocacy on the basis of the evidence will now deliver councils this additional annual $500 million fund. We hope as the Australian Housing Accord, that is the agreement between the federal, state, territory and local governments, sees the impact, as in we see more housing developed, that councils are better able to keep pace with the infrastructure that's needed alongside that because of this funding commitment that directly came from the State of the Assets report.
Yeah, okay. And just this is an area that we've been sort of focusing on, and I know you've done a little bit of stuff, but I'm really interested in your view on this. So when we talk about infrastructure, we talk about funding, we talk about very much the material things, the actual infrastructure itself. But we feel that there's sort of been a bit of a, not so much of a conversation around the people, the human element side of things. Right? We all know there's a skills shortage, and particularly in the local government space. But this is, in our view, this has been something that's been pre-pandemic. This has been an existing issue, and obviously the pandemic exacerbated these things. In terms of skills shortage and making sure local government has the right skills, the capacity and the capability, does ALGA have a view on that? And what's some of the advocacy campaigns have you been sort of doing in that space?
I think IPWEA is really wise to highlight that behind every bridge and road and library is a team of people, engineers, skilled planners and builders and a range of other professionals that are putting this piece of infrastructure in place. We were commissioned under the former federal government to undertake some work on behalf of local governments about the skills shortages that we heard consistently from local governments, and it, perhaps unsurprisingly to your members, found that local government has a collective workforce of around 190,000. It slightly dropped during the pandemic, understandably. We employ over 400 occupations. So it's an absolutely extraordinary opportunity for people looking for work to come and work with us in such diverse fields. But we, of course, also found significant skill shortages, particularly in engineering and planning, and that those were consistently a barrier to local governments being able to implement the needs of our communities. And again, that research has formed the foundation of our advocacy to the Commonwealth Government about the need for funding for training. We've been successful in advocating for a whole lot of new free vet courses, but we know there's also skill shortages in the university sector. We've also talked to state governments around the country with our member state and territory bodies, as I know IPWEA has, about sharing arrangements, about ensuring, for example, that the model that I first heard of from Wagga Wagga Council in New South Wales of having an engineer or a team of engineers perhaps based in Sydney providing support to the region of councils around Wagga. Those kinds of really innovative sharing arrangements of skilled professionals that help local governments. Ultimately, though, what we want to see is Commonwealth funding to support the growth of skilled professionals. And that means in councils having enough skilled professionals that are able to support, develop, mentor young graduates, be they from TAFE or university, and then build this incredible network of training systems within our local governments that are able to develop our local government leaders of the future. New South Wales has really led the way, for example, in coming up with a strategy for veterans, because we know that actually so many Australian veterans have an incredibly valuable skill set that when they leave the armed forces are very valuable and useful for local government, particularly now in the face of so many natural disasters. And so we're all using, I think, really clever, innovative ways to identify and harness skills from other industries. But I think we need to work more closely with IPWEA and others to ensure that a lot of that professional development is better embedded in local governments of the future. And what does that rely on? That relies on consistent, reliable, predictable funding from the federal government so that we can have confidence that the funding we receive is not just for 1 year, but it's for the long term. And that means we have the comfort and the confidence to employ people for the long term and have them training up and mentoring the leaders of the future.
Yeah, and I hear exactly the same thing. I've also impressed upon our members just how important it is to tell the stories of what they do. I mean, you're the biggest champion of local government, and you know innately just the amazing things you can get involved with, what you're doing and contributing to your local community. And I think that we can be better at telling the story. And I often say that to my member. You do some amazing things, and you do a lot of things that people take for granted. You know, that they walk outside and the parks are beautiful and the community spaces. That's what you do, but we need to tell the story. And we need to get young people interested and excited, both in local government, but also in our case as well, engineering.
Correct.
So tell me, what's the? We're working on this and I'm excited about this. The 2024 State of the Assets, 2024 project's going to be released next year. What's the focus now for ALGA for the next 12 months? What are you really sort of honing in on?
Well, as we have for many years, we're so focused each year on increasing the federal assistance grants. That really is our enduring priority because, again, we know those untied funds are so crucial for local governments. They allow us to employ the staff that we need. They allow us to have the flexibility to maintain our assets. We know that every elected leader loves to cut the ribbon on a new piece of infrastructure, but actually, you know, that level of federal assistance grant funding for simply maintaining our assets is so crucial. So it's a difficult political task to try and advocate to Commonwealth governments to increase that untied funding. I'm so grateful for everybody in local government who talks to their federal members and senators about the importance of that untied funding. It's so hard when I spend time in Parliament talking to federal members, and they often say to me, I don't even know what federal assistance go towards. So, you know, I really do thank councils who are communicating with their parliamentarians about what that funding goes to and what the world would look like if it were not available, and that will continue to be our priority. However, you know, we have been really delighted to, as part of the initiatives of this new federal government under Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, be back at the table in a range of areas, back at the National Cabinet table from time to time, the Council of Federal Financial Relations, KIFA, with all the treasurers. And so we're working hard around all those tables to ensure that our funding needs are being heard, but also the policy challenges are happening. We have scored a recent victory as part of the COP negotiations internationally. Chris Bowen has signed up to a new international agreement, CHAMP, that allows cities to better collaborate with Commonwealth governments in the design of emissions reduction activities that allows local government efforts in this space to be counted. And that's a really welcome global initiative that we advocated to the Commonwealth government to sign up to. It was great to see Chris Bowen doing that in recent days at the COP Climate Summit. And we hope to see the Commonwealth Government open up this new $100 million grant funding that they announced for energy reduction efforts for local governments. So perhaps local governments will be able to fund putting solar panels on their roofs of their premises, or being able to install heat pumps in their pools, both reducing emissions but also saving on their own energy costs. And in the process, again, looking at innovative workforce models. We've seen, for example, Lachlan Shire in New South Wales build this incredible ecosystem of skilled professionals in their towns around the installation of solar panels. And in installing something that reduced emissions and saved the council money, also built up a network of skilled professionals in the town to maintain those. And in doing so, are creating the jobs of the future. You know, this is what I love about local government. This is slightly off your question, sorry, but, you know, we're so able to find great grassroots solutions to really difficult challenges. And I'm really proud to be a City of Sydney councillor, but I often find the innovation is happening in really remote or small regional places where they have so few resources and they just find a clever way through to score multiple wins for the public good, all off the one little project.
Our perspective, we're beginning to take notice of this. We're looking at different solutions, natural green infrastructure versus grey hard infrastructure, looking at ways of educating our members on, we've got these targets, net zero targets. We've all got to be focused on this. So what else is it that ALGA is looking to promote or develop? And are we doing enough, do you think, in this whole climate change place?
I think this has two aspects to it, both action to prevent dangerous climate change, but also to mitigate against the inevitable changes that we're starting to see. The reason I'm so passionate about this personally is that my dad was an environmental scientist and he did a lot of work planning places. It's not an accident that I ended up in local government. He used to make us save our little grape stems from our lunch boxes and bring them home, and he would use those as his little fake trees on his models. You can tell I'm terribly old, and so this was done pre-computer modelling. But nevertheless, it's a really important topic for me, having grown up in a household like that. My dad was an obsessive recycler, all these really great local government things that I grew up with in my household. And I do bring that passion to the work that we do at ALGA. So we are delighted to see this new funding coming through. That will, of course, help councils to retrofit our own infrastructure, because we know that has been a barrier. Councils often struggle to find the upfront costs that you need to make the long-term savings, but once you get that upfront cost, the savings do stack up and the project's really worthy. But also it's great to see councils doing work beyond our own asset base. In the city we've done a lot of work with a range of organisations, including the Better Buildings Partnership, to support their work to help building owners in the City of Sydney think more cleverly about how they can, when renovating their building and applying for a development consent in the city, bring down their own emissions portfolio and the cost of maintaining those buildings. And that's been really leading work that has led to the City of Sydney's planning controls ensuring that those standards are set very high, therefore improving the performance of buildings, bringing the cost of maintenance down over the life of the building, and of course reducing emissions for our communities. So whether it's the work in our own asset portfolio or the asset portfolios that we might have development approval or influence over, I think local governments, again, have really led the space when it comes to emission reductions. I think what councils are now confronting, and this is very difficult, is the number of natural disasters that are impacting our communities as a result of our changing climate, and how we deal with that, again, is an enormous challenge that I see great innovation in councils towards. So, for example, we're seeing councils now thinking about how to retrofit surf clubs to be a bushfire evacuation centre, how to flexibly harness the public infrastructure that we have to better ensure that our councils are able to respond in what will be, sadly, really inevitably increasing natural disasters. On the basis of the Royal Commission into Natural Disasters in Australia, we were successful in advocating to the current federal government to have a new mitigation fund for local governments. It's an annual fund, and councils can apply for funding to retrofit or build new infrastructure to prevent and mitigate against disasters. So we're seeing councils again apply for, particularly coastal councils, flood mitigation works in their local area to support communities. We're seeing councils apply for all sorts of innovative things. My great friend Jack Dempsey up in Bundaberg as the mayor is advocating very heavily to the Commonwealth Government for some of this funding to ensure that he can put provisions in place to protect Bundaberg from water damage during those really challenging storms they have. So there's a lot of great work going on, but if councils don't think about the impact of these disasters, then we leave our communities unprotected. We have such an unusual situation in Australia. Local governments are not in our constitution. And so in the formal disaster management process, we actually don't have a role. But of course, when disaster strikes, who do people call? Of course, they call their council first. So we really are the first responders. It's been great that on the basis of our advocacy, the Commonwealth Government established NEMA, a new federal agency to support disaster recovery and resilience. We've taken part this year in scenario planning during the Commonwealth planning season to better prepare for the bushfire season, for example, that we know from the Bureau of Meteorology is going to be very severe this year. We've recently undertaken a tour of the Situation Room with our ALGA board to ensure that we're all working together with NEMA as closely as possible. We all hope to never see each other, but inevitably we need to during times of disaster. And so we've done a lot of work to ensure that where ALGA can and the Commonwealth can, we have the relationships and the partnerships that's needed to protect our communities. Of course, so much of what is done to recover from disaster is the responsibility of states and territories, and so our states and territories, local government associations are working closely there too, but with actually no formal constitutional role, it really is the job of local governments to support our communities through these really difficult times, and we do.
It's really interesting you talk about first responders and how local government is very much, when situations happen, emergencies happen, they are the first on the scene. And I say that because the American Public Works Association, they did a whole campaign around that, 60,000 members in the US, specifically around what local government does in terms of its first response. And it went down very well with the members. They did get a few questions from the fire and police, but it was certainly a well thought out campaign. And that's a wrap up of our inaugural episode of Infrastructure Matters by IPWEA with Linda. A big thank you to our guest, Councillor Linda Scott, for sharing her insights and experiences in local government and infrastructure. It's been enlightening to hear about the challenges and successes in managing Australia's local government assets, especially in these dynamic times. Now, don't forget, if you enjoyed this episode, stay tuned for more insightful conversations with industry leaders. Don't forget to become a member to catch every episode as it's released. Your feedback is invaluable, so please leave us a review or send in your questions and suggestions for future topics. Join us in the next part of the episode as we explore what drives individuals like Councillor Linda Scott and to dedicate their lives to the betterment of our communities.